November 20, 1943. Dawn breaks over the central Pacific. As the sun rises, thousands of United States Marines stare across the lagoon toward a narrow strip of coral barely 3 miles long and 800 yards wide. Betio Island, the heavily fortified centerpiece of Tarawa Atoll, looks deceptively peaceful in the morning light. But beneath the palm trees and behind the beaches, 4,500 Japanese defenders wait in concrete bunkers, steel-reinforced pillboxes, and coconut log fortifications that have survived weeks of bombing. The Marines climbing into their landing craft know this assault will be different. Unlike previous island invasions, the Japanese have had 2 years to prepare Betio's defenses. They've boasted that 1,000,000 men cannot take Tarawa in 100 years. The island bristles with coastal guns, anti-boat obstacles, barbed wire, and interlocking fields of fire. Every inch of beach has been pre-registered for artillery and machine gun fire. The Japanese plan is simple: kill the Americans at the water's edge. At 900 hours, the first wave of amphibious tractors, Amtraks, rumble toward the beach. Behind them, hundreds of Higgins boats follow, carrying the assault battalions of the 2nd Marine Division. The Navy's bombardment lifts and an eerie silence descends. Then, from every fortification on Betio, Japanese guns open fire. The water erupts with shell splashes. Amtraks explode. Marines die before reaching shore. What follows will be 76 hours of the most savage close-quarters combat in the Pacific War. The battle will shock America with its brutality and cost. Over 1,000 Marines killed for an island most Americans had never heard of. But it will also teach lessons in amphibious warfare that will save thousands of lives in future operations. This is the story of Tarawa, where boys became men, where Marines earned their reputation as America's toughest warriors, and where the island war in the Pacific reached a new level of horror. Tarawa Atoll lies in the Gilbert Islands, strategically positioned in the central Pacific. The atoll is a ring of coral islands surrounding a lagoon, with Betio Island at its southwestern corner. Betio is tiny, just 291 acres, shaped roughly like a bird with its head pointing west, but its location made it invaluable. Whoever controlled Tarawa controlled the approaches to the Marshall Islands, the next stepping stone toward Japan. The Japanese understood Betio's importance. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki commanded the defense, and he had transformed the tiny island into one of the most heavily fortified positions in the Pacific. Over 2 years, his garrison had constructed an elaborate network of defenses that took full advantage of the coral terrain and limited space. The fortifications were formidable. Shibasaki's forces built over 500 pillboxes and bunkers, many constructed from coconut logs and steel, reinforced with coral and concrete. The main defensive structures could withstand direct hits from naval gunfire. 8-inch coastal guns commanded the sea approaches. Dozens of 75 and 37 anti-tank guns covered the beaches. Machine gun nests interlocked their fields of fire, ensuring no area of beach was safe. Anti-boat obstacles and barbed wire barriers extended into the lagoon. The garrison numbered approximately 4,500 men, 600 Imperial Japanese Navy troops of the 3rd Special Base Force, and 1,900 construction workers from the 111th Pioneers, plus Korean laborers. These were not garrison troops waiting passively for relief. They were combat veterans trained in defensive tactics, prepared to fight to the death. Shibasaki had told his men that Tarawa would be the Americans' graveyard. Defensive strategy was sophisticated. Rather than attempting to repel the invasion at the water's edge, which earlier Japanese garrisons had tried unsuccessfully, Shibasaki planned to let the Marines land, then destroy them with overwhelming firepower from protected positions. Every beach approach was covered by multiple weapons. Every yard of terrain was pre-sighted for artillery. The defenders would absorb the initial assault, then counterattack at night when American supporting fire would be less effective. American planners knew Tarawa would be difficult, but they underestimated just how difficult. Intelligence photographs showed obvious fortifications, but they couldn't reveal the full extent of the defenses. More critically, planners made a fateful assumption about the tides. Vice Admiral Raymond Spruance commanded Operation Galvanic, the invasion of the Gilbert Islands. Major General Julian Smith's 2nd Marine Division would assault Tarawa, specifically Betio Island. The plan called for 3 battalion landing teams to hit beaches on the northern, lagoon side of the island simultaneously, supported by massive naval gunfire and aerial bombardment. The assault force was formidable. 3 battleships, 5 cruisers, 9 destroyers, and 5 escort carriers would provide fire support. The pre-landing bombardment would last hours, pulverizing the defenses. Then the Marines would storm ashore in amphibious tractors, LVT-1 alligators, and Higgins boats, seize the beaches, and advance inland. Optimistic planners estimated the island would fall in one day. The 2nd Marine Division was one of the core elite units, with combat experience from Guadalcanal. The division's 3 infantry regiments, the 2nd, 6th, and 8th Marines, were well-trained and combat-proven. But they had never faced defenses like Tarawa's, and they were about to confront a problem that would nearly doom the assault. The problem was the tides. Betio's northern beaches lay behind a coral reef extending up to 1,000 yards from shore. At high tide, landing craft could cross the reef easily. At low tide, the reef would be exposed or covered by just a few feet of water, not enough for Higgins boats, which needed at least 4 feet to cross. The Navy assured planners that tides on November 20 would be sufficient for landing craft to cross the reef. But local knowledge suggested otherwise. Australian coast watchers who had lived in the area warned that dodging tides could occur, unpredictable low tides that wouldn't rise to expected levels. These warnings were dismissed. The Navy's tide tables said the water would be deep enough. The assault would proceed as planned. The pre-landing bombardment began at 600 hours. Battleships and cruisers hammered Betio with shells ranging from 8-inch to 16-inch. Carrier aircraft strafed and bombed. Columns of smoke rose from the island. Explosions tore through palm groves. To observers on the ships, it seemed impossible that anything could survive such punishment. But the bombardment, though impressive, was inadequate. The Navy had allocated less than 3 hours of actual firing time, not nearly enough to destroy reinforced positions. Many shells fell on areas already devastated, while protected bunkers remained intact. When the bombardment lifted at 900 hours to allow the first wave to land, Japanese defenders emerged from their shelters and manned their weapons. At 9:10 hours, the first wave of 42 LVTs carrying the 2nd and 3rd Battalions, 2nd Marines, crossed the line of departure and headed for Red Beach 1, Red Beach 2, and Red Beach 3, code names for the assault sectors. The amphibious tractors churned across the lagoon toward the island. Behind them came waves of Higgins boats carrying the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, heading for Green Beach on the western end of the island. The LVTs crossed the reef successfully. Their track design allowed them to crawl over coral, but as they approached the beach, Japanese gunfire intensified. Artillery shells exploded among the vehicles. Machine guns raked the exposed Marines. Several LVTs were hit and stopped dead, burning in the shallow water. Others made it to the beach but were immediately hit by devastating fire. The disaster unfolded behind the LVTs. The Higgins boats, following in subsequent waves, approached the reef and ground to a halt. The dreaded dodging tide had occurred. The reef was exposed or covered by only 2-3 feet of water, not enough for the flat-bottomed boats. The coxswains couldn't cross. Marines had to deb a arcade into chest-deep water, in many cases 700 yards from shore. Loaded with 70-pound packs, weapons, and ammunition, they began wading toward the beach. Japanese gunners, trained on these approaches for months, opened fire with methodical precision. Machine guns swept the water. Artillery shells threw up geysers. Mortars dropped with terrible accuracy. Marines died by the dozens, then by the hundreds. Some were hit immediately and disappeared beneath the waves. Others made it 50 yards, 100 yards before bullets found them. A few made it all the way to the beach, exhausted, only to be cut down at the water's edge. The lagoon turned red with blood. Bodies floated in the surf. Equipment sank to the bottom. Entire squads were wiped out before firing a shot. Major Henry Jim Crow, executive officer of the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, later described it. The water never looked so deep, nor the beach so far away. Men fell, orange blossoms of explosions appeared, and the water was churned white with machine gun fire. On Red Beach 1, the right flank, Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Amy's 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marines landed in chaos. The battalion commander was killed almost immediately. His executive officer took command, then was killed. Companies disintegrated under fire. Survivors huddled behind the seawall, a coconut log barricade 4 feet high that offered minimal protection but was better than nothing. On Red Beach 2, the center sector, Major John Scodell's 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines fared no better. The reserve company coming ashore in later waves was nearly annihilated in the water. By mid-morning, Scodell had only a handful of men on the beach. He radioed the division, receiving heavy fire all along beach, unable to land all. Issue in doubt. On Red Beach 3, the left flank, Major Michael Ryan's detachment from the 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marines landed west of the main assault and found slightly less resistance. But they were cut off from the main force and fought an isolated battle throughout D-Day. On Green Beach, the western end, the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines under Major Lawrence Hayes landed in a fortified area and immediately became pinned down. The battalion suffered heavy casualties and made minimal progress inland. By noon on D-Day, the situation was dire. Of approximately 5,000 Marines who had attempted to land, perhaps 1,500 had reached the beach alive and combat effective. Many were wounded. All were pinned down behind the seawall or in shell craters, unable to advance more than a few yards. Japanese fire was so intense that simply raising your head invited death. Communications had broken down. Unit cohesion had dissolved. The assault was on the verge of failure. Colonel David Shoup, commander of the 2nd Marines, came ashore on Red Beach 2 around 1100 hours. He immediately recognized the crisis. His command post was a shell crater just beyond the seawall, fully exposed to Japanese fire. Over the next hours, Shoup coordinated the defense of the beachhead with remarkable courage and leadership. The situation demanded impossible decisions. Wounded men needed evacuation, but boats attempting to reach the beach were destroyed. Reinforcements were needed desperately, but sending more Marines across the reef meant more casualties. Ammunition and water were running low. The Marines held only a sliver of beach, nowhere more than 50 yards deep. Yet slowly, painfully, the Marines began to gain footholds. Small groups of men, led by sergeants and corporals whose officers were dead or wounded, began attacking individual bunkers and pillboxes. The tactics were brutal and costly. A squad would provide covering fire while a demolition team crawled forward with flamethrowers or explosive charges. Often the entire team was killed. But eventually, through sheer determination and sacrifice, bunkers fell one by one. Staff Sergeant William Bordelin exemplified the fighting. On Red Beach 1, he made multiple trips across fire-swept ground to bring ammunition and destroy pillboxes with demolitions. Though wounded 3 times, he continued fighting until killed while attacking his 4th pillbox. He received the Medal of Honor posthumously, one of 3 awarded for Tarawa. By nightfall on D-Day, the Marines held precarious positions on Betio. The beachhead was nowhere more than 300 yards deep. Casualties were staggering. Estimates suggested over 1,500 dead or wounded, with accurate counts impossible in the chaos. Japanese forces still controlled most of the island. The night would bring banzai attacks that could sweep the Marines back into the sea. But the Marines had achieved something crucial. They had survived. They held the beaches. Reinforcements were organizing for the next day, and critically, Navy Seabees were preparing to land and clear the reef obstacles, allowing supplies to come ashore. The expected Banzai attack came during the night, but it was smaller than feared. Japanese forces probed the lines, infiltrated marine positions, and killed sentries, but the mass assault that might have overwhelmed the exhausted defenders never materialized. Shibasaki, the Japanese commander, had been killed during D-Day, and the loss of leadership disrupted Japanese coordination. Dawn on November 21 revealed the extent of the carnage. The lagoon was littered with destroyed landing craft, floating equipment, and bodies. The beaches were carpeted with dead Marines and Japanese defenders. The smell of death and cordite hung heavy in the tropical air, but the Marines had held, and now reinforcements were coming. Throughout D+1, the 6th Marines and additional battalions from the 8th Marines landed. With the reef obstacles partially cleared and the tides more favorable, these reinforcements reached shore with fewer casualties than D-Day's assault waves. Fresh troops, plus resupply of ammunition and water, transformed the tactical situation. The Marines began systematically reducing Japanese strongpoints. Tactics evolved through bloody trial and error. Naval gunfire and artillery would pound a bunker. Infantry would assault with flamethrowers and demolitions. Tanks, finally ashore after D-Day difficulties, would approach pillboxes and fire point-blank into firing slits. It was slow, dangerous work. Every bunker cost casualties, but the Marines were gaining ground. Major Michael Ryan's isolated force on the western end of the island, designated Ryan's Orphans, achieved a critical breakthrough. His mixed group of Marines from various units fought their way inland, clearing bunkers and securing the western end of the airfield. Ryan's aggressive tactics demonstrated what was possible when Marines could maneuver rather than remaining pinned at the water's edge. By nightfall on D+1, the Marines had cut the island in two, controlled most of the airfield, and had pushed Japanese defenders into shrinking pockets. The battle was far from over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The question was not whether the Marines would take Betio, but at what additional cost. November 22 brought a dramatic change in the battle's character. With the island cut in two and Japanese command structure shattered, the fight became a series of isolated actions to eliminate remaining strongpoints. The Marines advanced methodically, using overwhelming firepower to destroy bunkers that might have held out for days in earlier fighting. The eastern end of the island, where Japanese forces had concentrated, became the focus of final operations. Pocket by pocket, bunker by bunker, the Marines advanced. Flamethrowers became the weapon of choice for clearing fortifications. Tanks provided direct fire support. Combat engineers blew up particularly stubborn positions with massive explosive charges. Japanese resistance remained fanatical. Wounded defenders fought from their bunkers until killed. Some conducted suicide attacks with grenades or bayonets. Others hid in bunkers, emerging at night to attack Marines from behind. A few attempted to swim away from the island but were killed by Navy ships patrolling the lagoon. Admiral Shibasaki's prediction that his forces would fight to the last man proved tragically accurate. By November 23, organized resistance had ended. Small groups of Japanese holdouts remained, but Betio was secure. The flag was raised over the island, a moment of triumph tempered by the sight of devastation and death surrounding the ceremony. The final casualty count stunned the nation. In 76 hours of fighting, the 2nd Marine Division suffered 3,407 casualties. 1,009 Marines killed in action. 2,101 wounded. 297 missing, most later confirmed dead. Additionally, 687 Navy personnel were killed or wounded, bringing total American casualties to over 3,000. For an island just 291 acres, roughly the size of a large shopping mall, the cost was staggering. Tarawa's casualty rate exceeded even Iwo Jima's on a per-acre basis. Japanese losses were nearly total. Of the 4,500 defenders, only 17 Japanese soldiers and 129 Korean laborers survived to be captured. The rest died fighting or committed suicide rather than surrender. The bodies were everywhere, in bunkers, on beaches, in the lagoon, piled in shell craters. Burial details worked for days. The physical destruction was complete. Aerial photographs after the battle showed an island virtually denuded of vegetation. Palm trees were splintered stumps. The ground was cratered like the moon. Every structure was damaged or destroyed. The lagoon was clogged with wrecked landing craft. Betio looked like the surface of an alien planet, not a tropical island. News of Tarawa's cost provoked controversy at home. Americans were shocked that such a small island could exact such a terrible price. Critics questioned whether Tarawa was worth taking. Some suggested bypassing heavily defended islands rather than assaulting them directly. Editorial writers questioned the strategy. Families who lost sons on that coral speck demanded answers. But military planners understood that Tarawa, despite its cost, was necessary. The Gilbert Islands had to be taken to enable the advance into the Marshalls. And critically, Tarawa provided invaluable lessons that would save lives in future operations. Tide and reef reconnaissance asterisk. The dodging tide disaster taught planners to conduct more thorough hydrographic surveys. Underwater demolition teams would be created specifically to scout beach approaches. Pre-landing bombardment asterisk. 3 hours of bombardment proved inadequate against reinforced positions. Future operations would receive days or weeks of preliminary bombardment, plus closer coordination between naval gunfire and the assault waves. Amphibious vehicle development. The LVT's ability to cross the reef while Higgins boats grounded emphasized the need for specialized amphibious vehicles. Future operations would employ improved LVTs in greater numbers. Communications. The breakdown of radio communications under fire led to development of better waterproof equipment and more redundant communication systems. Medical evacuation asterisk. The difficulty of evacuating wounded led to improved procedures, including hospital ships stationed closer to the assault beaches and LVTs designated specifically for casualty evacuation. Tank employment asterisk. Tanks proved effective once ashore but had difficulty landing. Engineers developed better methods for getting armor onto beaches quickly. Combined arms coordination. The battle demonstrated the need for closer coordination between infantry, armor, engineers, artillery, and naval gunfire. Training exercises before future operations would emphasize this coordination. These lessons, learned in blood on Tarawa, were applied at subsequent operations: Saipan, Guam, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Casualties at those battles were heavy, but they would have been catastrophically worse without Tarawa's lessons. In that sense, the Marines who died at Tarawa saved countless lives in future campaigns. Behind the statistics and tactical lessons were individual acts of courage that defined the Marine Corps ethos. 3 medals of honor were awarded for Tarawa. Staff Sergeant William Bordelon, already mentioned, destroyed multiple pillboxes despite 3 wounds before being killed. First Lieutenant Alexander Bonneman Jr., an assault engineer, led attacks against heavily defended Japanese positions on the 2nd day. Despite being wounded, he continued fighting until killed atop a bunker he had just cleared. Colonel David Shoup, the regimental commander, displayed extraordinary courage and leadership under fire throughout the battle, remaining at his exposed command post and personally directing operations despite being wounded. But thousands of other Marines demonstrated equal courage without receiving formal recognition. The riflemen who crawled forward to silence a machine gun nest, the corpsmen who braved fire to reach wounded men, The demolition engineer who placed charges on a pillbox knowing he might not survive the explosion. The coxswain who made repeated trips to the beach under fire to bring supplies and evacuate wounded. First Lieutenant William Hawkins, a scout sniper platoon leader, landed with the first wave and fought throughout D-Day despite multiple wounds, destroying pillboxes and inspiring his men through personal example. He died on D+1, but left a legend that inspired the naming of Hawkins Field, the captured airfield at Tarawa. Robert Sherrod, a Time Life correspondent who accompanied the assault, wrote, "It was not just courage that these Marines showed, but something more, a furious determination to close with the enemy regardless of consequences." His reporting brought the battle's reality to American homes and helped the nation understand what their Marines had endured. Tarawa entered Marine Corps legend as a defining moment, a battle that tested the Corps to its limits and proved that no objective was too difficult, no defense too strong, if Marines were willing to pay the price. The battle validated the Marine Corps doctrine of amphibious assault and demonstrated that even the most heavily fortified positions could be taken. For decades afterward, Tarawa veterans were a special brotherhood. They had experienced combat at its most primitive and brutal, fighting in water, on open beaches, in confined bunkers where flamethrowers and grenades were the only weapons that worked. They had seen friends die in horrifying ways. They had themselves survived against odds that seemed impossible. That shared experience created bonds that lasted lifetimes. The battle also influenced American military doctrine beyond the Marine Corps. The lessons of Tarawa informed Army operations in Europe, especially the Normandy landings. Planners studying Tarawa understood the importance of overwhelming fire support, specialized vehicles, thorough reconnaissance, and contingency planning. D-Day benefited from Tarawa's lessons. In the broader narrative of World War II, Tarawa represents a pivot point. It was the first major amphibious assault against a heavily defended beach in the Central Pacific. Its success, despite horrendous casualties, proved that the island-hopping strategy could work. Admiral Nimitz's drive across the Central Pacific became the main American offensive, complementing MacArthur's advance through the Southwest Pacific. Tarawa was brutal, costly, and for those who fought there, unforgettable. In 76 hours, over 1,000 Marines died for a coral speck most Americans couldn't locate on a map. The images from Tarawa, dead Marines floating in the lagoon, the beach carpeted with bodies, Marines sheltering behind a seawall under withering fire, shocked a nation that thought it understood war's cost. But Tarawa was necessary. The Gilbert Islands had to be taken. The lessons had to be learned. And it was Marines who paid the tuition in blood so that future operations could be executed more effectively. The men who died at Tarawa did not die in vain. Their sacrifice bought knowledge that saved lives at Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. The battle also proved something else, that American Marines, properly trained and led, could defeat any enemy in any terrain under any conditions. The Japanese boast that 1,000,000 men cannot take Tarawa in 100 years was answered in 76 hours. The fortifications that were supposed to be impregnable fell to men armed with courage, determination, and an unwillingness to accept defeat. 60 years after the battle, a group of Tarawa veterans returned to Betio. They walked the beaches where they had fought as young men. They looked at the rusted remnants of pillboxes and bunkers that had cost so many lives. They remembered friends who never came home, and they reflected on the price of victory. One veteran, asked if taking Tarawa was worth the cost, replied simply, "We had a job to do. We did it. That's what Marines do." That understated response captured the essence of Tarawa, a terrible job that had to be done by men who refused to quit regardless of cost. The Marines who stormed ashore on November 20, 1943, expecting to secure the island in one day, instead fought for 76 hours through hell. They waded through blood-red water, fought from shell craters and behind seawalls, burned out bunkers one by one, and finally planted the flag on ground bought with their lives. They proved that no fortress was too strong, no defense too complete, no cost too high when the mission demanded success. That is the legacy of Tarawa, 76 hours that defined what it means to be a Marine, an island that taught terrible lessons in blood, and a battle that, despite its horror, had to be fought and had to be won. The men who fought there deserve to be remembered not just for what they endured, but for what they accomplished and what they taught those who followed. Tarawa was hell, but it was a necessary hell, and the Marines who survived it and the Marines who died there earned a place in the pantheon of American military heroes.